Hi everyone. So my thought on the family dynamics were that they were all similar in one way or another, but they were also kind of different as well. I thought the two sisters and their mom, the most interesting thing that the mom said about them was that the mom is trying to advocate for them as much as possible so that the girls learn how to advocate for themselves. Um, I thought that point was really interesting because when I was an undergrad, I observed a 23, early 20s male with Friedreich's ataxia, and he was in a wheelchair and using an AAC device, but at the same time, he was pretty independent. He arranged all his own transport to get to therapy, and that was what they worked on in the therapy session, was using his AAC device to make phone calls for transport. I think he called to verify something else, but he's pretty independent and reliant on the AAC device. And I thought that was cool to see, especially after watching this video and hearing the mom say that she is advocating for her daughters, that here was somebody who was a little bit older than her daughters and was independent. And I think he started to present with the disease when he was around 10 or so. So it had been 13 years, and I thought it was great that he wasn't being coddled and his parents gave him his independence, since there isn't anything affected cognitively with this population. So I thought that was really great. And I thought another interesting point where all the families mentioned that you don't know how you can do it until you actually have to do it. And I think that's a really good point because no one actually thinks that anything bad is going to happen to them. And then when it does, you kind of just have to take it in stride and take each day as it comes to you. And especially when you have children that are diagnosed with the disease, I think the parents have to take on the role of being kind of a rock for their children, because if the child sees their parents sad all the time, they're going to think that it's something that they did, or it just could have a negative effect on the child. So I think the parents really have to take a positive outlook and do everything they can for their child. And that's what I think is a big difference between how you would treat and assess ataxic dysarthria in children versus adults, because I think with any progressive disease, it's hard for parents and loved ones around the person with the disease to cope as it progresses. But I would imagine that it's a lot more difficult for parents, just because they always say that parents are supposed to outlive their children, and parents want to do everything that they can for their child, and they dream for their child to have this great life ahead of them. So I would imagine it would be a lot harder to work with children with Friedreich's ataxia than adults with another type of progressive disease. So one of the things that I kind of took from the video was how different all the different children presented with the disease were. And I think that we have to keep that in mind, as with many speech and language disorders, there's no one way to treat everything because everybody's different, and that goes for assessment too. All of these kids were so different and presented with different balance issues, heart issues, speech issues, and I think that was really interesting because as a beginning clinician, I think it's really important to remember that everybody's different. And just because you see a diagnosis on a piece of paper, you can't just assume with, okay, this is how I'm going to assess them and this is how I'm going to treat them. And I also think a difference might be that there may be more counseling with children, so you're working with their parents closely, and I would just think that there would be more counseling, but I'm sure there's a fair amount of counseling in the adult population too with progressive disorders. Overall, I thought the parents and all the families seemed like they were great support systems for their children. I can't imagine doing it. I'm sure it's very difficult every day, but they seemed like they had a positive outlook, looking forward to a cure, and in the meantime doing all that they could for their children to give them the best quality of life possible. And I think that was great to see. And especially with the older girls, the sisters, I thought it was kind of nice to hear that she was living pretty well despite her disorder. And I think that's a great outlook to have, because if you let it consume your life, then there's really doesn't give a lot of hope for treatment and everything else. So I think her outlook was really positive, and she was making the best out of a bad situation.